Okay, good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Bob Whipperfirth. I'm the president of the Village of Windsor, and I also serve as president of the Dane County Cities and Villages Association. And then just a reminder that if you're not speaking, if you can mute yourself,
Gala. So I
so
almost
you have
wonder if we just want to
background
wait to
noise.
see what Gary sends to the group.
Okay.
Because the gala was on that email.
Let's.
Okay. All right. Again, thanks for being here today. We're going to talk about short-term rentals today. We have a number of guests that are going to present. And what I would like to do is just go through the list and have them introduce themselves, and then we'll come back to the top of the list and we will start with a presentation from City of Monona. Well, let's do the introductions first. We'll start with City of Monona. We have Neil and Nancy. Can you introduce yourselves, please?
Yeah. We're just waiting for our siren test to go down, Bob. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
So first Wednesday noon. I'm Neil Stexelty. I'm city administrator here in Monona. And I think the mayor is on here. She'll click on here in just a second.
You're on mute, Mayor.
Apologies. Nancy Moore, Mayor of Monona.
Okay. And then from the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, we have General Counsel Maria Davis. Maria?
Good morning. My name is Maria Davis. Yes, I'm General Counsel for the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, and I have been with the League since 2018.
Okay, thank you. And then from DATCP, Ted?
Yep, Ted Dahalski with DATCP, Environmental Health Technical Specialist with oversight of the lodging program.
Okay, thank you. And then do we have someone from Public Health, Madison and Dane County?
That was Stephanie. She had typed in the chat that she cannot hear anything.
Oh, okay.
She's just trying to rejoin, so I don't.
Yeah, and can you type in the chat if she can try to rejoin?
Stephanie, I see you're on. Can you hear me? Stephanie is on.
Okay, we'll let Stephanie try to maybe log back in again, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So again, we're going to start with City of Monona. Neil Steckschulte and Mayor Moore are going to do the presentation. And I guess what we're looking at for the group is how you've been dealing with short-term rentals, how it affects your local budget, and are you trying to add staff or hire independent people, things of that nature. So Neil and Mayor, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Neil, you're going to pull up the screen, right?
Yep, working on it right now, Mayor. Here we go. It's this one. Might not be right here. Having trouble. Why is Zoom not cooperating here? Come on. Let's see here. Try this again. Share this screen here about this. So the screen share doesn't seem to be working for some reason.
I can see it.
We can see it.
Oh, is it up? Okay, it is up. Okay, good.
Yep.
Is it just the slides, Mayor?
Yeah, I mean, the first slide, the opening slide is up.
Yep.
So
Okay, good.
we'll be able
All right,
to.
there we go.
Yeah.
So here's what we're going to cover, and we'll go right to here.
Great. So we thought we'd start with, what's the purpose of the ordinance? And, I'm guessing that many of us saw the birth of short-term rentals as a great thing. I know I've certainly stayed in my share of short-term rentals. And the whole idea behind staying in a personalized, cozy home instead of a cold hotel, if you will, for less money, was very attractive. But just as Amazon started out as a great way to just get a book, get any book in fairly short order, um, and has become a dominant force, however convenient it might be, with negative impacts on independent small business and the retail writ large. STRs have become a big business. Um, it's no longer just that your neighbor is renting out their place, for a UW football game or on, weekends or other times when there might be an influx of visitors to your locale. Um, to make a little extra money, fun money, or to help with house maintenance. It's, now become that that still exists, but added to that would be private equity firms that have gotten into the business, big hotel corporates that have gotten into the business because they see value in the market and are buying up properties and even building properties specifically for to create turnkey STRs. So, and even individuals that have bailed on, their gainful employment to start their own STR business, if you will, and now have it as their sole source of income. So, so these are, because of that shift, there's a variety of important purposes. The first being protecting the community's public health, safety, and general welfare. So, as I'm sure everybody here knows, not all housing stock is the same condition or up to code. Not all STR sites. I'm sure many of us know, Airbnb or VRBO or Booking.com. But in reality, there's a lot of smaller niche sites as well for STRs, and probably more like 20 or so altogether that operate in this market. Not all of whom have robust screening of who they're renting to, and so when we talk about the community's public health, safety, and welfare, we're talking about really from two angles. One is protecting the homeowners that are interested in renting, as well as the neighborhood and the larger community that's impacted. Um, Second is protecting the character and stability of Monona's neighborhoods. During COVID, desirable, often smaller communities experienced an increase in real estate sales as higher density areas became, frankly, less safe and more dangerous. So, and post-COVID, those second homes that were in many cases purchased during COVID became STRs. So neighborhoods with permanent residents, maybe children in your schools, people invested in your community, have become turnkey. And we have examples, lots of examples, not only here locally in Dane County, but I can use Door County as another good example here, right here in Wisconsin, where Marriott Corporation were buying up blocks of housing. Have bought up to operate STRs up in Door County. I don't know that here in Dane County there's been blocks of housing bought up, but certainly it's become a lot more. It's really shifted the real estate market, and I would argue with that shift, it's also created challenges for permanent residency of staffs. I know several communities up in Door County, as an example, that had to change other ordinances, like the ordinance that dictated how far away certain city personnel could be from the office, could live away from the office because their own, whether it's city administrators or fire personnel or whatever, could no longer afford to live in the community that they work in. The third, obviously, is mitigating the impacts of the STRs on the affordable housing stock, and that is essentially what I was just referring to. Have been numerous studies that have reflected an increase in the value of your housing stock because of the STR market when private equity firms and corporations can come in and buy housing at above market value and in some cases do make those purchases with cash. um, uh, then it obviously is at a disadvantage for folks that might be interested in staying in their house or around obviously the value of the housing more generally. People, families that are interested in moving into your community, getting priced out by those firms or those big corporations. So it's driving up the cost of housing overall. The fourth one is uh, obtaining a responsible contact information for any issues at the property. We all have a good tab on who our property owners are through property taxes and in numerous other means. But in many cases, again, if SDRs are more corporately owned or driven, they operate with property managers much the same way that hotel chains do. And so knowing who the contact person is and who's responsible for the property it can be elusive. And an ordinance allows us to close that loop. The next is obtaining occupancy information to help make sure that we get the room tax revenue owed to us as a community. And last, providing STR options for residents while regulating owners of STRs that where it isn't their primary residence. Currently, the city or the state of Wisconsin does not allow us to limit STRs to only primary residence owners. And so because of that, again, we want to be able to offer opportunities for our residents to get that fund money or to fix up their houses using some extra cash from STRs. But we have both operating in Monona. So the ordinance spells out the difference between those people, and you'll see in a minute, Neil will cover, it spells out the difference between when an STR is your primary residence and when it is an investment property that you're utilizing for revenue. So those are really the 6 key reasons why an ordinance has been beneficial, I think, for us and for other communities that have chosen to implement.
Right. Thank you, Mayor. So just very quickly, some of the key components of Monona's ordinance. Well, some of these are going to be relevant to our other speakers as they present things there. Essentially, Monona's ordinance was created under the city's police powers, not under our zoning, which is certainly a topic of conversation at the state level right now. So we'll get more information on that and from the league as we go forward. We have a permit and application process, $750 fee. It does require inspections from our building inspector and zoning. Requires our fire department and Dane County Public Health. So 3 levels of inspection are required. Essentially, we track them based on advertisements. Essentially, is if they are actively advertising, they need to be a permitted use. We have a software package that we use to kind of screen the internet to identify and find those anyone advertising, and we maintain a database of those properties. I think the key areas of our ordinances are rules applied to owners versus renters, primary residents versus non-primary residents, mainly in terms of duration of stays and total number of days of rental days allowed. A key component of ours that we're wrestling with right now is exceptions to these rules may be considered for, quote, economic reasons. The ordinance does not currently define what those economic feasibility reasons are. So essentially, what we've been operating as staff on the basis of our own legal counsel is if an exception is requested, we have been granting it unless there's absolutely really key reasons in terms of complaints or other documented issues with the short-term rental in the past. So the exceptions are kind of really good, about almost a little less than half of our permits request exceptions to what we have in the rules for those times. So we're debating exactly how effective that the rule is if we are kind of in a position where we're simply granting an exception all the time. So something we'll be looking at going forward. We have a $500 to $1,000 per day fine for violating the ordinance. Enforcement, key component here, enforcement is based on confirmed violations, not just numbers of complaints. And the reason that's important is we do have some folks who it's just a kind of a NIMBY situation. They're not happy that there's a short-term rental in their neighborhood or next to them. So they're calling constantly and trying to identify, raise issues with that particular neighbor. So we really are basing the violations have to be on really confirmed violations from our inspector or from our police department or from other staff of someone actually being violated. So we've joked a little bit at the staff level as if you require a flow chart to figure out how to get through our ordinance, maybe we need to streamline it a little bit. There are plenty of steps here in terms of yeses or nos, other aspects of how we want to do this. I'm not going to go into super details on that. We'll certainly answer any questions after the session here on this as we go through, but this kind of differentiates between, again, some of the other areas that are certainly going to be up for question and discussion, I think, at the state level with current court cases that are being. So some of this may have to change in the future. So just a quick overview of our rentals. We've had 29 applications on file right now. That is down from about 37 in June. We're not quite sure if that's solely due to just the economy or because of the new permit requirement. We probably think it's a little bit of both. We currently have 10 requested exceptions out of those 29. So a third of them are asking for exemptions from those timing rules. In terms of those are the exception requests we have a 180-day consecutive day rental period. They would like to exceed that. Someone would like to, a total number of 30 days per year for certain operators when their operator's not on site. Folks have asked for exceptions there, and then allowing 1 to 6 day rentals for properties that are not the primary residence of the operator. That's probably our most frequent area we have had exceptions. And again, unless we haven't had many reasons to say no in terms of the way the ordinance is written. We have one applicant citation currently being pursued in court because they've operated without a permit, and we consistently documented them not operating without a permit. So that is currently having legal action taken against them at this point. So last slide here is just some challenges we've seen. We very much underestimated the amount of time and staff coordination that is going to be needed to implement the ordinance. Generally, this involves myself, our city clerk, our planning director, our building inspector, our city attorney, or my fire chief, and the number of staff touch points that happen to really make this and implement everything that's in the ordinance as presented is quite difficult. We're looking at some ways to streamline some of those things. Working with Dane County has been certainly one hopping down there. They've been backed up. They're looking at these all over the county as well. We're kind of taking one a little bit out of their book and trying to work on a kind of a self-reporting affidavit that says if they've passed an inspection in the past, nothing has changed, they can simply sign off. My inspectors can confirm that and accept that to eliminate the number of in-person touch points we need to do. So looking for ways to do that. I mentioned earlier not defining economic feasibility, which makes it hard to decline exception requests as the ordinance is currently written. But the other challenge is once we define that, then you still have to actively track it and measure it, which we really don't have the staff resources to do. So it's finding the fine line there, figuring out exactly what's the best way to allow that exception rule, but still to be able to actually pay attention to it and implement it and be effective with doing that. Managing the information generated by the Granicus software, if anyone's familiar with this, it kind of just provides this big long dump of a database, and you still have to kind of sort through the data. And it's not just you have 6 new short-term rentals that have appeared on within your jurisdiction in the last month. You have to really kind of go through and manipulate the data and kind of continue to track that, so it's not as easy as it could be. One thing we definitely did not count on was, when we've gone in and requiring these inspections, lo and behold, we discover zoning and building code violations in these properties. So that triggers a whole round of implementation and evaluation through those more traditional channels that we have to deal with. And then unfortunately, so obviously the amount of time and cost it would take to enforce via legal actions, the one we're actually pursuing right now, is probably in the $3,000 to $5,000 range in terms of what we've actually had to try to pursue this with. And then obviously the uncertainty of recent, court cases at the state, which hopefully we're going to hear more about as we go forward here. So with that, that's my presentation and comments on that, and will certainly be available afterwards or as we go through here to answer any questions. So.
Okay, thank you, Neil and Mayor Moore. And so if you can stop the screen share for
Yep, I'm looking at figuring out how they can do that right now. I may have to log out and log back in. My computer's not cooperating, so I'll be right back.
Okay.
I'm going to kill this so it ends here, and then I'll be back.
Yeah, we'll take questions at the end after everybody's had a chance to do their presentation. And again, we're going to try to keep these to somewhere around 10 minutes so we can get through and have time for questions at the end. So next, we'll go to the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. Maria Davis, go ahead. Welcome.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just a few recent court cases that we've seen dealing with short-term rentals. And to lay the foundation for that, I'll just do a very brief refresher on what the statutes say regarding our authority to regulate short-term rentals, which, as I'm sure you all know, is very limited. So we can prohibit rentals of 6 or fewer days. However, we can't prohibit rentals longer than that. If a rental is operating for periods between 7 and 30 days, we can limit the total number of days that they operate within a calendar year, so to a maximum of 180 days. We can also require a license if the rental operates for more than 10 nights per year. Aside from that, the statute does expressly reserve our authority to regulate rentals so long as it doesn't conflict with the other limitations of the statute. And the statute is 66.1014. So the District 2 Court of Appeals somewhat recently released 2 opinions on the same day dealing with short-term rentals. And both decisions were troubling for us for a couple of different reasons. The first case involved a challenge brought by the Wisconsin Realtors Association against the City of Neenah. Neenah's ordinance laid out several standards for short-term rentals, but only 2 were at issue in the case. So Neenah had a requirement that short-term rentals obtain a license to operate and that the property be the applicant's primary residence. And the case really focused on that primary residence requirement. That's what was being challenged. Ultimately, the court concluded that the primary residence requirement did conflict with the statute, and so we are preempted from having such a requirement as a result. The court's reasoning was not very elaborate. Essentially, it boiled down to the court saying that because the primary residence requirement prohibited some short-term rentals from being operated as a short-term rental because they weren't the primary residence, that therefore it amounted to a prohibition, and that logically conflicted with state law, and so we were preempted. So the effects of that decision are a little bit twofold. Any primary residency requirement, unless it can somehow be distinguished from that case, is going to be considered void. The larger concern with this case ties back to the court's reasoning. So essentially, the concern is that if a regulation that results in some short-term rentals not being able to operate is going to be considered a prohibition on short-term rentals and therefore in conflict with the statute, where does that leave us? In other words, what can we regulate and how do we enforce any of those regulations? How do we give them teeth if the inability to operate for failure to comply with our regulation is a violation of the statute? So, for example, if a short-term rental needs to have a conditional use permit to operate and they don't meet the conditions for the permit and it's denied, is that going to be a problem? Or if you have a license requirement, what the statute expressly allows us to do in certain situations, and you want to revoke that license or suspend that license because they're not complying with your conditions, can this decision be used to say that's an effective prohibition and therefore you can't regulate in that manner? That is our concern. Now, the court didn't say that, but that's a concern about the effect of that decision, especially because there wasn't a lot of reasoning provided to substantiate the court's conclusion there. The second case involved a challenge to the Village of Summit's short-term rental ordinance. And the village ordinance required short-term rental operators to obtain a local license. They needed to get rental permits for each tenant. There was a guest registry requirement, and then it also prohibited rentals for 6 or fewer days. Here, it was a different issue. However, it wasn't those aspects of the ordinance that were largely being challenged. The property owner here claimed that Summit's ordinance was effectively a zoning ordinance and that it should have been enacted under the statutory procedures for amending or adopting a zoning ordinance, and that they didn't do that. And so that was a due process violation. They should have had legal nonconforming use status. And this is all despite the village's ordinance not being in their zoning code, but being in the business licensing chapter of their code. The court looked at the ordinance under a set of common law factors created by the courts that are used to help determine whether an ordinance is a zoning ordinance. And these factors aren't an exclusive list, but they are a set of characteristics that the Supreme Court has identified as being representative of the traditional characteristics of a zoning ordinance. And unfortunately, the court's analysis was just a little confounding here. The upshot is that the court did determine Summit's ordinance was a zoning ordinance, and it viewed the ordinance as regulating where short-term rentals could be, despite the fact that it did not separate any aspects of the village, any locations of the village into separate districts. It applied to the short-term rentals throughout the whole village. It regulated where short-term rentals could be instead of how they could operate. And then it was a fixed forward-looking ordinance that was applicable to all properties in the village. So really, and I'm not going to go through all the details of all the individual factors, but the way the court applied the factors, and I would say misapplied the factors, is very troubling and kind of reversed some of the concepts. One of the factors is that an ordinance talks about where the use can take place and not how it can take place. And in my opinion, the village ordinance did the exact opposite. It only spoke to how a short-term rental could be operated and not where a short-term rental could be operated. So the reasoning from the court here was very concerning for a couple of different reasons. From the short-term rental perspective, technically, ordinances are going to need to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis to determine whether or not they're a zoning ordinance. But I think it's safe to say that under this decision, many ordinances that were not enacted under the procedures for enacting a zoning ordinance are at risk of, under this Court of Appeals decision, being determined to be a zoning ordinance. And that would mean that most likely most current short-term rental uses would be eligible for legal non-conforming use protections. Now, they still have to meet a threshold to get that, but if that threshold is met, they're going to have legal non-conforming use, even if you go back and redo your ordinance as a zoning ordinance properly. And that potentially includes a prohibition on rentals of 6 or fewer days. The court didn't say that explicitly, but it seems to suggest that that could be the case. So those two cases taken together leave us on very tenuous ground as to what can we actually do to regulate with regard to short-term rentals. But there is actually a broader concern with the Summit case as well. And it ties back to the court's reasoning and how it applied those factors when looking at whether or not it was a zoning ordinance. Because really the court, despite saying that it was focusing on things that regulated where short-term rentals could take place, it really focused on regulations aimed at how they could take place. And so the concern there is that the court's reasoning could be applied to other ordinances outside of the short-term rental context. So you could arguably apply the court's reasoning to any ordinance that has some sort of nexus to how someone can use their property. So for example, noise ordinances or a mowing ordinance or, a limitation on how many pets you can have on your property. Anytime there's that nexus there, because of the way the court reached its decision, there's a concern that somebody who is motivated could use that decision to try and extend it to those situations, which is concerning because obviously our police power ordinances are generally that are going to regulate activity are going to apply through the whole municipality. They are often going to have some sort of nexus to property and they're going to restrict activity. And so obviously this decision being implied in those situations is very concerning. And then there was a petition. So that case was petitioned for review to the Supreme Court. They have not decided on that petition yet. The League did file an amicus brief in support of granting that petition for review. So I am very hopeful that the court will grant it, take it up, and kind of course correct where we are with short-term rental regulation and whether or not they should be considered zoning ordinances. The last case is Clinton versus Sister Bay. This is being appealed to the District 3 Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals in Wisconsin are unified. So that means that a decision out of District 2 is binding on District 3 and vice versa. This case involved an ordinance where it was essentially an occupancy limit for short-term rentals. So the ordinance required or provided that you could only have 3 individuals staying in a legal bedroom and only a maximum of 4 bedrooms could be used in a rental. So if it's a 5-bedroom home, you can only use 4 bedrooms. It's essentially a 12-person occupancy limit. That was challenged. The court, it was in their zoning code. So some it was brought up, but the court found that yes, it was a zoning ordinance. However, they did not feel that the property owners were entitled to legal non-conforming use. So that was a win for us. The court also determined that, in its opinion, this regulation did not run afoul of the statute, so was not preempted, that it wasn't a prohibition. The owners tried to argue that, this is a prohibition because before the ordinance, I was renting out 5 bedrooms. Now I can only rent out 4. And the court looked at it and said, look, you're still able to use your home as a short-term rental. You're not being prohibited from that. And so they sided with the village there. The court also said that the property owners were entitled to any vested right protection under the building permit rule as well. So we will see what happens with that appeal. The league is paying attention to it, and I think the first brief is due in a couple weeks. I think on October 13th. So there will definitely be more developments here on the appellate front, and we will keep everybody posted. But that's what I have now, and I'm happy to take questions when we're ready.
Okay, thanks, Maria. I think we'll try to get through the other presentations, so hopefully you can stick around and we can have questions at the end. Okay. All right, next we have Ted from the Wisconsin Department of Agricultural Trade and Consumer Protection. Ted, welcome.
Thank you. Just moving my screens around here. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm Ted Tucholsky with the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture. I'm here to talk about ATCP 72, which is the administrative code for lodging programs. You don't think of regulatory recreational businesses when you think of DATCP, but we do exist. We've got 5 administrative rules. Our 2 lodging ones are ATCP 72 and 73. When we're talking about short-term rentals, we use the term tourist rooming house, which is an antiquated 80-year-old term that's locked in statute. So that's the one that we use. But it is basically synonymous with the short-term rental or that STR. So you'll hear us use TRH. So these are regulated under ATCP 72. We also have 73, like I said. Those are bed and breakfast establishments. They're very similar to a tourist rooming house, except a bed and breakfast must be owner occupied at the time of rental. You can do up to 8 rooms, so 8 different reservations at the same time, and that operator can serve breakfast to the guests. A tourist rooming house, you're just renting out that house and you're getting that whole house for your rental. Like I said, we are regulated under Statute 97. That gives the department the authority to create the rule for the lodging program. And it also allows our agent health departments to partner with us to carry out that work for both licensing and the inspection process. So you guys are very familiar with Public Health Madison Dane County. They are one of our agents that carry out this program. So the state inspected counties are primarily in the Southwest and Northeast. Those are those gray counties. Everyone else is an agent health department that's carrying out this work. So in total, we have 60 different MOAs with various either UW systems, cities, counties, consortiums, you name it. And there's over 300 environmental health staff that are carrying out this work. So these are your registered sanitarians, your registered environmental health technical specialists, and then also technicians as well. From a licensing standpoint, this is looking at the states excluding Dane County and Milwaukee County. Those 2 counties are on a different inspection program. So I don't have a clear view of the licenses that they have issued to date. But for the 69 other counties, it's very heavily dominated by the tourist rooming house. We have nearly 11,000 tourist rooming house licenses compared to roughly 2,000 hotel/motel licenses. And then that 180 are bed and breakfast. One thing to note here is say a 50-room hotel would be issue 1 license. It would take 50 tourist rooming houses to get the equivalent rental space for that. So it's not necessarily an apple-to-apple comparison. The lodging inspection that our staff do, it's very much a physical facility static inspection. It isn't very dynamic. It's not like going behind the kitchen and watching food preparation occur. But the items that are looked at during these inspections are fire safety. So smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, are they functional? Are they located in the correct area? Are there enough of them? Safe exiting, we have noticed, especially in tourist rooming houses or short-term rentals. It may be advertised as a 2-bedroom house on the realtor's webpage, but you get in there and then all of a sudden there's sleeping rooms in the basement. Maybe they're trying to use a loft as a sleeping room. So we want to check those out, make sure that they're actually safe for someone to get out of in case there is an emergency. We also look at plumbing. So this is more of a concern on private well systems, ensuring that total coliform or E. coli negative testing is occurring. And then we're also going to expand that to nitrate testing as well. We're looking for simple things like good repair, backflow prevention, and that all plumbing fixtures are discharging either to a municipal connection or to a private on-site wastewater treatment system or POUT system. Next, we're looking at room maintenance. That's just general good repair, cleanliness. Is the room being cleaned at turnover? If dishes or utensils are being provided, are those being sanitized between each guest stay? Or is there at least a consumer notice provided and the sanitizer in case the guest wants to do that themselves? General premises, making sure that garbage is collected, that there isn't any harborage on the grounds. And then also consumer notices, such as the permit being posted and then retaining a guest registration of all the people that have stayed at that facility so that we can contact them in case there is a traceback event for a disease outbreak. Part of the problem with ATCP 72 is it's been unchanged for 40 some years. So the HSS 195 back in the 80s looks very similar to what we're using today in the ATCP 72. The lodging options that were in the 80s have very much changed, as we've been discussing. You're still getting your homes that are being rented out, but now we're seeing some more modified or tiny homes that are looking to be used for rentals. We have more complex homes that are being used, and then we still have our larger condominiums or resorts that are all being regulated under this very antiquated code. So it came time that we needed to scrap this code, do a complete repeal and recreate, and modernize it. Some of the few things that we've been working on and moving through the rulemaking process with that modernization is increasing the number of terms and definitions within our code. Currently, we have 20. In the proposed rule, we have well over 100. Purpose of that is so that we're all speaking the same language. The intent is that a regulator or a operator can pick up that code and hopefully come to the same conclusion by reading the rule. And right now, that does not occur. We've incorporated expectations for handling pests and pathogens such as bedbugs and Legionella. We're looking to align smoke and carbon monoxide alarms with current statute. So for example, current ATCP 72 just requires a single smoke alarm, but in statute, we're expected to have these on every floor to include the basement, within each designated sleeping room, and then outside of each separate sleeping area. Similarly, carbon monoxide alarm language in statute changed in 2018. Our code still references that older language, which puts an emphasis of finding a fuel burning appliance, putting an alarm within a certain distance of that appliance. The new way of doing it that changed with the International Building Code is if a fuel burning appliance is present, find where the people are sleeping and put a carbon monoxide alarm outside of that location. In addition, we're looking to add language for slip, trip, and fall hazards. So these facilities are all ranges of date of construction, and different building codes apply to them. So we look to put a very basic, handrails on stairs, guards on elevated surfaces to give a uniform safety across the board, regardless of when these facilities were constructed. So you name it, we've seen it. Poorly placed furniture, elevated surfaces with no guards at all, or if guards are provided, they're just way too large, or just very questionable, unsafe exiting areas. And then another item, last item I'm touching base on here is this risk-based criticality. So this was borrowed from the FDA and the Food Code. And what they did there was they categorized every single provision in the code as either being a priority item, priority foundation, or a core item. So priority items are things that if you don't have in place, you are likely going to have an injury, death, or illness. So in this example, if you don't have a functional smoke alarm, that's a priority item that we would want fixed immediately, preferably while that inspection is still occurring. Below that would be a priority foundation item. If you've got multiple priority foundation items, it's likely going to lead to a priority issue. So in this example, replacing a smoke alarm every 10 years, you may have it, but you want to make sure it's still within the operating range. And then lastly is core, that's your general sanitation and maintenance. So, and again, in this example, it'd be testing your smoke alarm according to manufacturer's instructions. So by highlighting these priority items, it draws attention to the operator to know which items are key to running a safe business and lodging operation. And then lastly, as I said, we were doing a revise and recreate of this rule. We are in stage 6 as of Monday. So we passed the legislative review and now are on to the publication portion with the Legislative Reference Bureau. Should take 1 to 2 months, and then we did put a 90-day delay before its effective date. So I would assume this should be in inspectors' hands and in operators' hands come that first quarter of 26. And that is all that I have.
Okay, thank you, Ted. Hopefully you can stick around for questions at the end.
Yep, will do.
All right. Next, let's go to Stephanie from Public Health Madison and Dane County. Stephanie, welcome. Looks like you're on mute yet.
All right, you guys can hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Massaro, and I am a supervisor with the Public Health Department for Madison and Dane County. And as Ted said, we're an agent for the state of Wisconsin, Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection. So we live or we work really closely with the state. And so we enforce DATCP 72, like Ted said, and just want to give just some basic information about Dane County statistics about short-term rentals, or like Ted said, we call them TRHs. In 2015, we had about 15 licenses that were short-term rentals. 10 years later, we have 284. So it is definitely an area that has really grown for us in the last few years. And I would say in 2018, 2019, we had a big jump, and that was because a couple of years before that, we had sorry, I just saw the messages there. I got sidetracked. We had we were using host compliance to find some of these unlicensed facilities, and that was something that we did that was just within the city of Madison. That wasn't for all of Dane County. We had worked with some other departments to get host compliance and utilize that program to find some unlicensed TRHs. And then we had another big jump in 2020, where we had about 100 more new licenses come in. And then since then, we haven't had such a large jump anymore. And we're, like I said, we're up to 284 now. And we don't have host compliance anymore. And so when we have new ones come on, that is either because somebody has reached out to us, or we have received a complaint that somebody is operating an unlicensed TRH. And so then we go out and we work with those people and get them licensed. In the last 10 years, we haven't had that many complaints at our TRHs. We've only had about 115. And of those 115, the majority of those are unlicensed TRHs. And so then we go in, work with them, get them licensed, and move forward from there. I know that Ted talked a little bit about B&Bs. We don't have a whole lot of B&Bs. We only have about 13 of those. And that is about it for statistics that I have for everybody. So if anybody has any other questions, let me know.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. So let's go ahead and open it up to questions. We've got about 10 minutes left. So there's quite a few people in the meeting here. I'm sure there's a number of questions. If you want to just feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, go ahead. Tim?
Yeah, I'd like to understand from Monona, you put an exception into your ordinance for economic feasibility, but didn't really define what that was. What was your intent in putting that in the ordinance?
Mayor, do you want me to try to answer that one, or do you want to take that one? I mean, I guess like, from our standpoint, Tim, I think it was probably, there are examples of, I think, certainly local residents, Tim. I think we had one story. I mean, it's mostly anecdotal evidence, but it was literally we've had one family who had grew up here in Monona. They'd moved away, but they've got kids that they'd like to move back. So, but the only way they could keep their house there is if they had an income stream to be able to maintain it until their kids were ready to actually come in and buy and move the house, which is exactly the story we want to be able to support and maintain. So there's that example. There's other folks who've literally made the case, residents that this is the only way they can afford their mortgage is if they do some sort of afford their property taxes locally to do that. So I think we're seeing that from the resident standpoint. We're hearing that argument from our own residents. but then it also opens the door up, obviously, to other situations. Then, as we go forward, is the challenge we're seeing by not defining any criteria. It's hard from a legal standpoint to approve one and deny another. So I think it's just a situation where we have to try to, either need to tighten up that language, but then we need to do so in a way that it's not completely overbearing in terms of trying to document. And then all of a sudden we're in a case where are we evaluating financial data to determine if there's really an economic hardship? And so we got to find the fine line of what's the best avenue to do that. So we're kind of working on that a little bit right now, but it certainly provides some flexibility for residents, but it also creates some challenges though too.
Okay, Mark from the Village of Dane is asking, can you prohibit by not having them listed as a use in the zoning district? And Maria just answered. Maria, can you expand upon that a little bit?
Sure. I would just say that, the statute is very clear in that we are not able to prohibit short-term rentals unless it's a 6-day or fewer situation. And so even doing that through zoning, again, as a short-term rental, I think would be problematic.
Okay. Maria, from your perspective, how do you see this changing or maybe not changing from the state giving better guidance and tightening up some of these regulations?
Well, from a legislative perspective, I don't really have a beat on that right now. I think we're all just kind of waiting to see what the courts tell us, and then we'll go from there. I am hopeful that we'll get a good outcome in the Summit case. And I haven't seen any of the briefing in the Sister Bay case, but I'm going to be optimistic until I have a reason not to be, that that will, prevail there as well. But I think it's going to be kind of a continuing challenge. Our authority here, our residual ability to regulate is going to be continually under the microscope.
Okay. Any other questions?
Jamie from the Village of Windsor to City of Monona. You had mentioned that you use a Granicus software to identify the short-term rentals. We here at the Village have a Granicus software that we use for agendas and minutes. Is it just coincidence that it's the same name, or is it actually the same software company?
I believe it's the same software company, Jamie. I think this is a kind of a web scraping system that goes through and looks at Verbo and Airbnb and looks at their websites and their listings and scrapes the data and pulls it up and generates a kind of dumps the database of report out. I think pretty sure it's the same software company.
Okay, I appreciate it. We'll check into it.
Yeah.
I would say too that I can't recall the name. I could look it up on my email, but I believe the City of Madison that was also using Granicus has shifted to a different software.
That might be host compliance. I think Mayor, yeah.
Better. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
So we're just counting on Maria to fix all this for us, right? So
no pressure though, Maria. All right, last chance. Are there any last questions?
Yeah, this is Anne. I just wanted to mention I had 2 documents links in this event invitation that you might be interested in looking at. One was an recent article from the Wisconsin Realtors Association. They just did a study of how short-term rentals in 3 areas of Wisconsin, 3 tourist areas of Wisconsin, are impacting their housing. So that link was in there. Also, an informal survey results, a little Excel spreadsheet that I included, showing which communities, cities and villages in Dane County have a short-term rental ordinance. So that was just an informal survey that I did. So you can go back and check your invites if you want to see more on that information.
Okay. Well, this was really good information today. I know many of our municipalities struggle with this issue, so it's always good to get together and share ideas and thoughts and try to problem solve to the best that we can. So with that, if there's no other last questions, I want to thank all the presenters for being here and all of our guests for attending today. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.